right, welcome. Thanks for joining me on this video talking about a roadmap for managing emotions. So if you haven't been in one of my trainings or watched one of my videos yet, let me just tell you a little bit about me. My name's Adam Saenz. I'm a licensed psychologist. I've been practicing for 20 years, and over the course of my career, I've practiced in just about any setting you can expect to find a psychologist: inpatient psychiatric hospitals, medical hospitals, what else? Juvenile justice, schools, outpatient mental health. So over the course of my years, I've seen a lot, and I've worked with a lot of different kind of folks. It's been such an honor and such a pleasure. So for this module, for this video, I'm talking about emotions. And that, I think in some ways, emotions are to a psychologist, I guess maybe you could say what a hammer and a nail are to a carpenter. I mean, it's the fundamental essence in many ways of what we deal with. It's about emotion. So this is a topic that's obviously near and dear to my heart, and a topic that I've done a lot with. So let's go to the PowerPoint here, and there you go, a roadmap for managing emotions. Unlike other titles in my videos, this one's actually pretty straightforward and understandable. In another video, I think the title of the video was, what was it? A relationship-based approach to behavioral de-escalation, or something pathetic like that. It looked like, the title looked like I was trying to write a dissertation. And so I'm learning how to be more language friendly in my title. So I think this one's pretty, here, you know what? I'm gonna give myself a round of applause just for coming up with a title that actually makes sense at some level. So there we go, roadmap for managing emotions. That's what I'm talking about. Preview, what am I going to cover? Well, we're going to do a little warm-up exercise. I like to start with these warm-up exercises because they just really help focus our intention. And my goal is for you to be able to take this information and actually apply it, to your daily life. And so I think these warm-up exercises that we do to start are a good way to frame the learning. So that's the first thing we'll do, is a warm-up exercise. Then I'm going to talk about why this is important. Why do we need to develop emotional literacy? So what do I mean by emotional literacy? Well, emotional literacy, it's like literacy in language arts. So in language arts, literacy means it's this process of, when young preschoolers come, or kindergarten kids come to school, we say to them, we're going to show you these things called letters. What are letters? Well, they're shapes. They're shapes. They're symbols, really. And each of these little symbols represents a sound. So this shape that looks like an A, we call it an A, it sounds like this, A, or it sounds like ah, right? And here's the next one. This shape is called a B, and this is ba. And so we teach them 26, shapes, 26 letters that have sounds with them. And then we say, oh, and by the way, when you combine C, A, and T, those three symbols, the sounds, when you blend them together, they go cat, cat. So that sound, cat, is also sort of a verbal symbol, and it means that real furry animal, that pet that you have at home that purrs, okay? And that's basic literacy. So you start off with the symbols combine to make words, and those words stand for things in our world. And then those words combine to make sentences, and the sentences combine to make paragraphs, and the paragraphs combine to make stories. And that's how we convey meaning using writing and language. And so all of that process is called literacy. So back to the slide here. Emotional literacy is saying, oh, well, there's this other roadmap where I learn about emotions, and what are emotions, and what do they feel like in my body, and where do the emotions come from, and what do I do with them? That's called emotional literacy, is just understanding that. And it's so important because as I'll talk about later on in the session, emotion, all emotion, anger, happiness, joy, confusion, frustration, all of that, it's fuel. And so emotional literacy means I recognize the emotions within me, and I connect those emotions to behaviors that make my life better instead of making my life worse. That's really what emotional literacy is. So I'm going to talk about why we need that. And then I'm going to talk about the 5 ways to respond to emotion, 5 different ways we can respond to emotion. And then the very last thing I'll talk about is how do we actually instruct emotion, which is another way of asking, in number 2, I'm asking, why do we need to develop emotional literacy? And then in number 4, I'm actually talking about, well, how do you actually do that? How do you actually develop emotional literacy? So that's the roadmap. That's what we're going to be covering. So to get ready for the warm-up exercise, you're going to need a pen and a piece of paper. You can use a pencil, you can use a crayon, you could use any form of writing utensil that floats your boat, whatever you want to do. But you're going to need something to write with. And here's what we're going to do. I'm going to play some jazz music. So let me cue up the jazz music here. There we go. Jazz music playing. And I want you to do this. I want you to finish this. If you could pick one emotion to describe your childhood, it would be what? Okay. So I'm going to go first, and then I'll let you go. So let me back off the music here. If I could pick one emotion to describe my childhood, it would be anxious. That would be my emotion, man. From the time I was about 7 until I was 18, which is childhood and adolescence. Anxious is the one emotion that I would use to describe my childhood. So I want you to think now, what is the emotion that you would pick to describe your childhood? If you had to pick one, just kind of overarching emotion. Okay. Now, number 2, when you grew up, were there emotions that your family did not permit? If so, what were they? What happens to you now when you experience that emotion? So that's a lot there. So let me kind of talk through what I mean by that. Turn down the music a little bit. So emotions that my family did not permit. Number 1, as crazy as this sounds, was happiness. So I grew up in a low SES home, single parent home. My mother was obviously under a lot of stress. As a single parent mom, she had a high school degree and she worked making minimum wage at a bank. And man, we were just always stressed out, which is why, the dominant emotion in my childhood was anxiety. We were just always anxious, always fearful. So my mom didn't do happiness well, and she always said like whenever I would be happy about something, she literally would say like, don't be happy, because I'll tell you right now, you get happy and life's going to come smashing down on you and the other foot's going to drop, and happiness isn't for us. It's our lot in life to be miserable, and it was really horrible. It really was. And I'm not judging my mom. I mean, she was trying to do the best she had, but she was just out of her league and under a tremendous amount of stress. But because she didn't permit herself to feel happiness, because I think she was just so afraid of losing it, which is part of the human experience, is you have emotions and you lose emotions. You have happiness and you lose happiness. We all cycle through that. But I think she was just so afraid to get happy. Like, she didn't even want a taste of happiness because it was just so much easier for her not to be happy, So we never did happiness. And I sort of grew up anxious and always kind of had this frown on my face, So that was an emotion that was not allowed in my family. And so that was it. And what happens now when I experience happiness? I think now I'm finally over it. Like, as an adult now, I finally know how to be happy and not feel guilty about being happy. But I remember, when I was in my 20s and I got married, my wife and I started having kids, and I was in my 30s. And then at some point, my wife said this thing that was just absolutely crazy to me. It was lunacy. She said, this summer we should take a vacation. Here, I said, boo. I said, boo to that. Take a vacation. We can't afford a vacation. We don't have time for a vacation. A vacation is fun. If we take a vacation, we're going to go to hell. And I don't think I actually said, I know I said we don't have money for a vacation. And then I don't know if I said we don't have time, but I didn't say we're going to go to hell if we take a vacation. But in my mind, I was thinking like, no, vacations are fun. And I'm not allowed to do fun. I don't do happiness, So all the way into my adulthood, I carried this thing about not being able to experience happiness. And so then my wife, came back like a week later and had a budget. And she said, no, actually, we do have money for a vacation. This is where we're going to go. This is how much it's going to cost. This is where the money's going to come from. We've been saving. We're good. So like, for me, it's like, oh, okay, great. She's thought about it. So in theory, we have the money to take a vacation. So we took a vacation, and I remember the whole time, and it wasn't anything extravagant. Like we just drove to the beach and spent the day at the beach and went out to eat and then came home with our kids. It was nothing huge, but the whole day I was thinking like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm having fun. This is great. I mean, I enjoyed my time with my family, absolutely, but I don't know. I mean, still at some deeper level, I felt guilty about being happy. So that's how it impacted my adulthood. I got over it. Thank God. I went to therapy and figured out how to be happy. And now I can take vacations and be happy. But I'm going to play the jazz music again. And I want you to just reflect on that. What emotion in your family was not permitted? And what happens to you now? So take a couple of minutes to work through that. Okay, take just another minute to finish that activity up. Okay. So you've reflected on that and you've written down your answer. And now I think there's a third one. Let's see. Yeah. Which emotion in others makes you most uncomfortable now? So which emotion now, when people get a certain emotion, makes you uncomfortable? So let me go first. I think the emotion that makes me uncomfortable, maybe sadness. When people get sad, no, I think I'm okay with sadness. Well, I mean, honestly, I think that question for me is, as a psychologist, as a therapist, I've learned to be comfortable with emotions in a room. But before I had my training and before I really knew what to do with emotion, one emotion that really made me uncomfortable was anger. I didn't know what to do with anger because when I grew up in my house, when people got angry, other people got hurt. And so anger was like this real, I didn't like it as an emotion. And anytime somebody got angry around me, my first thought was who's going to get hurt. And so my first response was to get angry, because it was sort of like, okay, you get angry. Well, I'm going to get angry too. So if you come at me, I'm going to come at you harder. And that was just like this coping mechanism that it's like survival mode, fight or flight. So, it used to be that anger made me really uncomfortable, and it made me angry. I still like anger. I don't get angry with anger now. I've learned to accept it as an emotion. but I get real impatient with people who are angry still. So that maybe that's a way that I respond now. So I want you to think about that. What emotion now makes you most uncomfortable? Okay, so you've written down your answer. That's awesome. Okay, now back to our topic here. So we're again talking about emotions and what to do with them. You've done this little warm up activity to help you understand. How are you feeling? I'm going to come back to this feelings chart, but I want you now. Just this is kind of like a free bonus lesson. Pick a feeling that describes where you're at right as you watch this video. I hope it's bored on there, because if it is, womp, I'm not supposed to be boring you. So you're probably thinking, I feel happy because I'm learning from Adam, right? How do I feel? I feel confident because I've taught this course before. And I feel optimistic because I believe you're going to, I really think you're going to learn. I mean, I hope you learn something, but I really think you're going to learn something. So that's how I feel. Okay. So let's talk about, this idea of emotions and why this matters. I told you we'd start with a warm-up exercise, and we've done that. So why does this even matter? Why do you even need to know this? So let's go back to the PowerPoint. I'm going to tell you why this matters, and I'm going to start this discussion with an amazing athlete. Okay, so here we go. There he is. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, Michael Jordan. Arguably one of the best basketball players to ever play the game, arguably one of the best athletes to ever compete in a sport. You know, I emphasize arguably, but he was an amazing athlete, played for the Bulls, and then he retired, and then I think he came back and played again. I want to say for the Wizards, but don't quote me on that. But I think we would all agree that Michael Jordan was just a stellar basketball player, And so the question that we ask is, how did Michael Jordan get so good? Well, here's one option. Here's one possibility. Maybe Michael Jordan was sitting around in Chicago one day in his early 20s saying, I'm really bored. I need to do something with my life. What should I do? Basketball. That's an option. I could be a basketball player. Let me go down. I think Chicago has a team. I think they're called the Bulls. Let me go just talk to the coach and see if I can walk on. And then I'll do that. And so then he talked to the coach, and the coach said, yeah, we'll give it a shot. And lo and behold, it turned out that he had this hidden talent and he was better than anybody. I mean, no, right? That's not the way it went, obviously. Well, here's the deal. Before Michael Jordan was this stellar stud professional athlete, he was this collegiate athlete in North Carolina, right? So, he didn't step into this role as a professional rock star out of nowhere. It came from somewhere, and it came from his work in college. So then you ask the question, how did he become a good college athlete? Well, he was sitting in his dorm room as a freshman, eating a bag of Cheetos, thinking, I wonder what I should do here in college other than be a student. Maybe I could play basketball. Let me go talk to the coach. Well, no, it didn't work that way. Before Michael Jordan was an amazing college basketball player, he was an amazing high school player. Now, if you ever watch there's a documentary, I think ESPN did called The Big Dance or something like that. And it was this really great series on the Bulls and their journey in the 90s. They talk about Michael Jordan, and in his high school career, he actually, I think as a freshman or a sophomore, was not a standout. I don't think he made the varsity team, but by the time he was a senior in high school, he was doing really, really well. So all of that is to say, you look at a guy like Michael Jordan, and how did he become the great athlete that he's known for? Well, it started with behaviors that go all the way back to his adolescence. And he practiced these behaviors, and then the practice made permanence. The practice of those skills made those skills permanent, and that permanence led to permanent perfection, really. But it all goes back to what he started before anybody knew who he was, when he was just another high school kid. It goes all the way back to that. So those behaviors that were started in adolescence locked in, and he practiced them, and as an adult he was locked into that. So that's what happened. That's how he became the great athlete that he is. So now let me tell you my toxic boss story. Unfortunately, I've only had one toxic boss, but that's it. That was sort of, that picture kind of describes how I felt with my toxic boss. So the deal with my toxic boss is that he was, this is my first, full-time job out of graduate school, was working for a school district, for a school. And the superintendent, one of the superintendents that I worked for in the district, he was just toxic. I mean, I just didn't like the guy. And he was narcissistic. He was a bully. He would intimidate employees. He would raise his voice and yell at people. He just sucked. Not as a human being. He had tremendous value as a human being. As a leader, he sucked. He was toxic and nasty. And man, I couldn't stand to work for this guy. Fortunately, he moved on. So the question is, as a grown man, I guess he was in his 40s, he was middle-aged at that point. How did he become a toxic leader, right? Like, how did he get to a point where he was leading an entire school district in that mode, like being that toxic? Well, he was a great guy. And then one day he woke up and said, you know what? I think I'm done being a servant leader and leading out of humility. I know, let me try this. Let me be an idiot. Let me just try being a toxic idiot. And I'm going to wake up one day as a superintendent and be a toxic idiot. And then he became a toxic idiot. No, it didn't work that way at all. Before this guy was a toxic superintendent, my guess is that he was a toxic principal. Before he was leading a district, he was leading a campus. And my guess is that at a campus level, he was very toxic and bullied people and manipulated people as well. So then the question is, how did he become a toxic principal? Again, he didn't just wake up one day and say, I've been a really tonic, healthy leader. Let me try being a toxic principal and see how that goes. He didn't wake up one day and turn a switch. My guess is that before this guy was a toxic principal, he was probably a toxic classroom teacher. And before he was a toxic teacher, he was probably a toxic teenager, just like the kid on the left in the red shirt bullying the kid on the right in the red shirt. So my point is that this guy, who was just a grossly ineffective leader as a middle-aged man, became that ineffective leader because he had behaviors in place that go all the way back, I'm guessing, but I think it's safe to say, all the way back to his high school experience, to things that he was practicing as an adolescent, most likely. And what that means then is going all the way back to his adolescence, he was engaging in behaviors that were linked to feelings and emotions that he had that were toxic and hurtful. And he practiced them and practiced them and practiced them and practiced them through his career in education, and eventually got to the top point of his career being that guy. In the same way that Michael Jordan was this stellar basketball player because of habits he practiced dating back to his adolescence, this guy was a stellar toxic. He was stellar at being toxic because of behaviors that traced back to his adolescence. Okay, so here's the deal. What we're talking about in this video, what I'm talking about in this video, matters because the habits that we impart to our children carry into their adulthood. The habits, and among those habits is this, how to manage emotion. The habits that we impart to our children carry into their adulthood. That's why this is so, so important. Okay. So Dan Goleman is an American psychologist. He was at Loyola for a long time. I'm not sure he's still there. Great guy. I mean, just personally, he's a wonderful, brilliant academic. And he's the guy, this term of emotional intelligence, he's really the one that brought it into the public awareness. Back in the 90s, he wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence. And that book in the 90s was really when people first started hearing about emotional intelligence. And so great academic, and just has done so much for the field. And this is one of for guys that know the world of emotional intelligence, this is a quote that he has in one of his books. If you don't have self-awareness, if you're not able to manage distressing emotions, if you don't have empathy, if you don't have effective relationships, then no matter how smart you are, you're not going to get very far. And that quote really just sort of speaks to emotional literacy as a part of broader emotional intelligence. So he's saying, hey, if you don't know your emotions and you can't regulate them, then no matter how smart you are up here, you're not going to get very far. And it just speaks to the idea of the value of emotional intelligence. Well, with all due respect to Dr. Goleman, boy, I just flatly disagree with that. This idea that you can't get very far. And the story that I just shared about that superintendent who went all the way up to the very top of that organization without emotional intelligence, without self-awareness, without the ability to regulate his emotion, is proof that what Dan Goleman said is not really true. You can get really far in life without being able to manage your emotions. And if you doubt that, and my story, think of this, and I know this is going to ruffle some feathers, but I'm going to go here anyway. Think back to the 2016 presidential election. I'm not a politician. I don't know anything about political science. But what I do know is, as an emotional intelligence expert, is that the people, in my opinion, that led both of those parties, the Republican Party and the Democrat, that made it to the top of those political parties, they may have been brilliant with finances. They may have been brilliant with foreign policy. They may have been brilliant in a number of capacities, right? But I'm here to tell you, as an emotional intelligence expert, if either one of those candidates had the slightest bit of emotional intelligence, they were brilliant at hiding that skill. So in my opinion, you have two people that ascended to the very top of their structures that, in my opinion, were grossly lacking in emotional intelligence. And it's not just in politics. You can look around at some of the biggest corporations and the people that end up in CEO leadership positions. They're not all emotional intelligent. Some of them are very toxic, men and women, So all of that is to say, I don't think you have to have emotional intelligence to get far in life. But here's the real question, I think. Will I be the kind of person that leaves a mark or a scar? That's really what it boils down to. And I think one of the primary distinguishing factors, in terms of who are the kind of people that leave a mark and who leaves a scar, people that leave marks in a good way, like they've made a good mark, they tend to be emotionally intelligent. They tend to know their emotions and regulate them very, very effectively. People that tend to leave scars and damage in their pursuit are people that don't have emotional intelligence, people that they just act out and lash out on their emotions, and they do silly, stupid things when they feel emotion. So that's why this is so important, because when we learn the roadmap and when we teach the roadmap, we are imparting a skill that just enables people, we become people that leave a mark and not a scar. And we train people to become people that leave a mark and not a scar. So that's why this stuff is so important. Now, let's go ahead. The Equipped Classroom, this is, where I'm getting this content. So this book I wrote, I released that in 2020, the EQ intervention, EQ being shorthand for emotional intelligence. We call that EQ. And I wrote this book about work that we have been doing in businesses and in schools across the country, and how helpful it is to students and to teachers and to executives and employees. And so that's what it's all about. The curriculum is called the Equipped Classroom. SEL is another way to say EQ. In schools, they call it SEL. The most effective SEL interventions begin with adult SEL. And as adults apply SEL strategies in their own lives, they become living interventions for every student. So really what that means, broadly speaking, is that emotional intelligence works best when it starts with me. When I, as the leader, practice it and live it and model it, I have the best systemic effect. I can't just say, hey, you guys need to be emotionally intelligent, and then I go live life like a fool. That doesn't work, because people are going to look at my behaviors, and that's all that matters. Is that's what speaks more than what I'm telling them to do. But when I, as the adult or as the leader, practice emotional intelligence, I am the living intervention. Like, I'm modeling and living out what I want to see happen in the world. So it really starts with me living it. Okay, what is emotional intelligence? It starts with self-awareness, me being aware of my thoughts, my feelings, my personality, and then regulating it. Once I'm aware of my thoughts and my feelings and my personality, how can I control them in ways that are helpful? When I add to that empathy, which is knowing what you're thinking and feeling, and then social skills allows me to connect with you, that equals effective decision making. That means that I'm centered, I'm focused, because I'm aware of my inner world and I'm regulating it. And then I'm aware of your inner world through empathy and social skills. I've connected with you, and so we're good. And when we come together in that model, we make good decisions. I make good decisions about my life and my career and my parenting and my relationships. You make good decisions, and we come together as a team that makes the best decisions that it can make. And the good thing about effective decision making is the more I can make effective decisions in my life, the less I live with regret. I don't want to look back at my life and say, oh, shoulda, woulda, coulda. I mean, we all have that. We all make mistakes. But when I'm living a life of emotional intelligence and practicing emotional literacy, I look back and there are much fewer mistakes. I look back and say, man, thank God I chose that. No regrets there. So that's what this is about. It's about me becoming a best version of myself through emotional literacy. All right, let's go forward. There are 5 ways that we can handle emotion. So now that you have a sort of a sense of like, oh, this is why this is so important, it actually has real world application. This decides, this is a skill that turns young adults into successful middle-aged adults. This is relevant in the classroom. It's relevant in the workplace. Wherever we are, this matters. And now I've I think, laid the case for why this matters. So now let's move to the next bullet point, or the next step, or agenda on this video. And I'm going to talk about the 5 ways we can handle emotion. Okay, 5 ways to deal with emotion. Number 1 is to ignore emotion. In some way, act like it's not there. The thing about ignoring emotion from a leadership perspective is it's just the easiest thing to do. So if I'm leading a classroom or a campus or an office or a football team or whatever, and I know that the people that I'm leading are emotional, that can be a problem. And I don't want to deal with it because, like, man, I've got things to do. I'm the leader. We need to do this, and this. So I'm just going to ignore the emotion. Something inside of me may say that y'all are not feeling well emotionally, but whatever. We're just going to ignore it and move on. Now, let me say, there is a time and a place to ignore emotion. Absolutely. We can't all the time be stopping and saying, how are you feeling? How are you feeling? Okay, now, how are you feeling? How are you feeling? You can't do that over and over and over. At some point, you just have to ignore emotion and go on with what you're doing as a leader, in whatever setting. But that can't be my only play. Like, I can't get through day by day by day just ignoring emotion, because, as I'll talk about in a minute, and I think I've already mentioned, emotion is fuel. And if I ignore emotion over and over, then what that means is I'm ignoring fuel over and over and over. And that fuel is going to build up in the people that I'm leading, or even if I'm ignoring my own emotion, it's going to build up inside of me. That's problematic because built up emotion, like built up fuel, eventually is going to get toxic or explode. So there's a time and a place to ignore emotion. That camera. There's a time and a place to ignore emotion, but that's not where I want to go all the time. So that's one option. I can ignore emotion. Next option. I can inhibit emotion. Tell my students or whoever I'm leading, just restrict them from experiencing challenging feelings. So what does that sound like? It's this, like, hey, I'm the leader in the classroom. I'm the leader in this office. I'm the leader on this football team or swimming team or whatever. I'm not going to act like y'all aren't emotional. I know that you're angry. I know that you're frustrated. I know that you're scared, that you're anxious. I know you're sad. I know all that. But you know what? We're not going to do that here. When you come into my classroom, when you come into my office, when you come onto my football field, this is a no emotion zone, a no anger zone. You leave your anger in your locker. You leave your anger in the car before you come into the building. You just put that anger aside because you do not have permission to feel that feeling here. So squash it and be done with it. So I'm not ignoring it, but I am inhibiting it. And I am telling you that you do not have permission to feel that. Well, again, when we inhibit emotion, we're inhibiting fuel. And that may help us get through a bad day once. But if that's what we're going to over and over and telling people, you can't feel that, you can't feel that, you don't have permission to feel that. It's like being in denial, it's just sort of like saying, nope, there's no problem here. I don't see any problem. And it's just not helpful. It's not helpful. So that's another thing that I can do is I can inhibit emotion. So let's talk about the third one. The third thing I can do is I can invalidate emotion. Tell my students or whoever I'm leading that they're wrong to feel how they feel. Okay. So ignoring emotion means I'm just going to act like it's not there. That's not a good long-term plan. Inhibiting emotion means I'm going to let people know that I'm aware of it, but I'm just not going to give them permission to feel it. And that's not a long-term plan, a good long-term plan. Well, the next one is I can invalidate emotion and tell them that they're wrong to feel how they feel. So this is what it sounds like. Let's say a student comes up and they're angry, because whatever reason, they're angry. Maybe they had a bad day at home, bad morning at home, whatever, they're angry. Had a bad interaction in the hallway and they're angry. So I come in, I'm not going to ignore their anger, and I'm not going to invalidate or inhibit it and tell them, hey, you leave your anger outside. I'm going to let them bring their anger in, but I'm going to invalidate it. And what I'm going to say is this: you shouldn't feel angry. You should feel happy because you have a wonderful leader like me, and anyone would be happy to have somebody like me. You shouldn't feel sad. You should feel grateful that you have a roof to sleep under and a meal, right? You should feel grateful that you can even come to a school like this. Do you know how many children that are starving in another part of the world just wish they had your opportunity? You should turn that frown upside down and be happy. That kind of stuff. Oh, here, you know what? I'm going to boo that. That's just not helpful when we start invalidating feeling. Nobody gets to tell me how to feel. I feel however I want to feel about whatever I want to feel. And nobody has the privilege of coming and defining or assigning emotion to me, which is great because it means I get to feel however I want to feel. But the other side of the coin is, and by the same token, I don't get to tell anybody else how they should feel. Whoever I'm leading, they get to feel however they want. So back to this thing about the roadmap. I can ignore emotion. I can inhibit emotion. I can invalidate emotion. And none of those options lead me to emotional literacy. All of those options short circuit the possibility that we're going to have emotional literacy. So let me explain what I mean by that. So let's talk about literacy from a language arts perspective. So my job is to teach literacy. Let's say I'm the reading teacher. What if I ignored letters and say, nope, there's no letters here. We're just going to ignore them. What if I inhibited letters and said, you will not write letters in this class. If you want to practice writing letters, you write them somewhere else. We're not going to do letters in this class. What if I invalidated letters and said, no, that thing that you wrote, it's not an A. I decided it needs to be an R. I'm going to redefine the system. Though that thing that you thought that was a B, well, I'm going to decide, nope, it's not a B. It's the number 7. And I started invalidating everything they, like, can you imagine, like, who's ever going to want to learn to read if that's the model where you inhibit or invalidate or ignore letters? Like, of course not. Of course you don't. And the same thing with emotional literacy. If we want to train ourselves and other people to grow up and become people that are emotionally intelligent, that understand their emotions and regulate their emotions, then when we engage in these 3 strategies, we're not going to get there. So then what do we do? Well, number 4 is this. What if we invite emotion? Tell your students or whoever you're leading that all feelings are welcome. Wow, that is huge. So you just put it out there and you say, you know what? Hey, this is an emotion zone. Like, you are free to feel whatever you want to feel in my office, in my classroom, on my campus, on the football field. If you want to be angry, man, you be angry. If you want to be sad, you be sad. If you want to be happy, you be happy. Whatever feeling you have, you are entitled to that feeling and you are invited to bring it to the table. Okay? May sound good in theory. Here's why that's so scary. Because it's like, hey, Adam, wait, time out. Didn't you just say that all emotion is fuel? Yes, I did. So let me get this straight, Adam. You're telling me that I'm supposed to invite all of these fuels to the table. Anger, let's say that's strong wind. Yeah, bring that strong wind to the table. Depression, let's say that's electricity. Yeah, bring that electricity to the table. Let's say depression, sadness, let's call that fire. Bring that fire to the table. Joy, let's call that gasoline. Bring that to the table. So in essence, what we're doing is we're saying, everybody bring your fuel to the table. That sounds like a recipe for disaster. And it can be, yes. You put all that stuff on a table, all those fuel sources to the table, and one wrong move and everything goes kaboom, and it's ugly, it's nasty. Yes, that absolutely is a risk, which is why so many people say, that's a risk I don't want to take. I would rather ignore the emotion. I would rather inhibit the emotion. I would rather invalidate. And that's my way of controlling the environment. That's my way of making sure that that kind of crazy explosion never happens. Okay, well, yes, there's that short-term gain. We're limiting the likelihood that an explosion is going to happen, but we're getting that gain at the cost of developing emotional literacy. So then we have to say, oh, okay, I'm going to invite all of that emotion to the table. So what do I do with it, Adam, when I bring all of that fuel to the table? Well, then you instruct emotion. This is where we actually develop emotional literacy. So I'm going to talk you through that roadmap, but let me just break it down very, very quickly and say this. The roadmap for managing hold on one sec. Sorry, I had to fix something on my screen. The roadmap for managing emotion is you have to think of like an engineer. So from an engineer, let's say I'm an engineer and I've got a table and there's a battery that has electricity and there's a gas can that has like gasoline in it, and then there's a compression tank that's got compressed air in it, and so those are fuel. And then I've got another tank that's got let's say propane. So those are all fuel sources at the table, and they're contained. And so we could think of those as different people. Like, this is one person with sadness and one person with anger and one person with joy, right? So that's sort of the metaphor here. Well, if I'm an engineer, I'm thinking, yeah, that could be dangerous, but here's the deal. that gas can that has gasoline, I'm going to put that fuel in my truck, and that fuel will power my truck. Now my truck is a tool, and that tool can make my life better. I can use my truck to go to the store. I can use my truck to give somebody a ride, so awesome. That fuel is a blessing. It's not a curse. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Okay, what about the propane? The propane, it's no good for my truck, but if I hook up that propane to my stove, I can use the stove as a machine to heat my food. That's a good thing. That makes my life better. I can use it to heat my house. That makes my house warm. That's great. What about the electricity? Well, I can take that battery and I can hook that battery to a machine called a computer. And that computer is a machine that makes my life better. So you see where I'm going. The engineer is thinking, how can I connect the fuel with machines that make my life better? So emotional intelligence is, how can I connect those emotions, that fuel, with behaviors that make my life better? That's the chain here. So yes, we're going to bring your emotion to the table, and we're going to teach you how to connect that emotion with behaviors that make your life better and not worse, that make you a life giver and not a life sucker, that make you tonic and not toxic. So that's how this whole thing's working. So let's go back to the PowerPoint, and now I'm going to teach you, how do you instruct emotion? Number one, instructing emotion. How do you do it? Step one is you identify the feeling using a feelings chart or any other cues. So you can say this: hey, Adam, looks like you're feeling angry. I see that your fists are clenched, your eyebrows are squished, and your face looks like this one on the feelings chart. So here's an example. That's a feelings. We looked at one of those. That's a feelings chart. Okay. So step one, again, is just naming the emotion. So you're seeing somebody and they look angry or they look sad like that. Isn't that was a weird sad face? That's not my sad face. Anyway, I was just making one. Whatever it is, you see that and you say, this is how you invite them. Hey, you doing okay? Looks like you're angry. Looks like you're sad, and you identify it for them. So step one is you just name the behavior. That's how you're really inviting the emotion. So after you've identified the feeling, and you could use a feeling chart, because a lot of times, especially with younger kids or men, because we are acculturated not to do emotion. Men are trained not to do emotion, which is really, really problematic for men. This is kind of an aside, but I've heard a lot of talk about how we're encouraging women, young women, students to pursue STEM fields like math and science. And I love that, man. It's like, women, don't let men own that. Like, man, y'all can rock that too. I love that. It's just breaking down gender biases and stereotypes. There's a parallel conversation we should be having nationally, which is, and by the way, men, it's okay to cry. It's okay to have feelings, rather than, man, you need to suck it up, man up and get over it. That kind of stuff. It's toxic. It's hurtful. But that's another workshop for another video. So, man, I don't even remember where I was. We're identifying feelings. So you're saying, I know what I was talking about. You may ask them, how are you feeling? And if it's a guy, I don't know. I don't do feelings, whatever. Well, help them and say, well, to me, it looks like you're angry because your face is squished, or to me, it looks like whatever, or to me, it looks like this face on the feelings chart. So that's just developing emotional literacy, and it's developing empathy for the other. You're showing them this is what empathy is. It's me teaching or showing you that I can tell what's going on inside your body by looking at your body. Like, I know what your emotion is by looking at your body. So it's a powerful first step, this idea that we're going to identify the feeling. So then you say, hey, step two is you validate it. Hey, man, it's okay to feel angry. Sometimes I feel angry when people ask me to do things I don't really want to do. That's an important step, validating feelings, because you're not saying you're angry. You shouldn't be angry. You should be happy. You're saying, you're angry? Psh, I get angry too, man. I got stuck in traffic today and I said some things out loud I shouldn't have said, and that's such an important step, because you're telling the person there's nothing weird about you for having that feeling. It's normalizing the feeling. I feel it too. And so instead of feeling isolated or instead of feeling like an idiot for feeling that way, that person feels good. Like, oh, thank you. I'm in good company. I'm not the only one that feels this. You've partnered with me. Thank you. That means a lot. So that second step is just validating the emotion and saying, man, it's okay. It's okay to feel happy, sad, whatever you feel. That's good. But then you go to the third step. And the third step is link the feeling with a maladaptive behavior. Maladaptive, in other words, is hurtful or problematic or dysfunctional. Hey, Adam, I know you're angry, but hey, when you get angry, when you feel angry, you use your body to hurt other people. And that's where you just name what's not working. So back to the engineering metaphor, it's like you're this tank of gasoline, and right now that gasoline is linked to a machine called a stove. And if you put a lighter on that stove, it's going to be bad. That whole thing's going to blow up. That machine shouldn't be connected to that fuel called gasoline. The machine that it should be connected to is a vehicle, a truck, right? So that's sort of what you're doing, is you're pulling out the link and connecting it with the right behavior. So you're saying, right now, that emotion that you've got, that fuel called anger, it's linked to this behavior that we can call fighting or physical aggression. Not good, man. That's not going to play well for you as you get older. Like, you may think now you can fight when you're on the playground, and that may work, and it may work at home. But when you get older and you're working and you get into a fight with somebody, you're done. They're not going to put up with that. And so my act of love to you is to let you know that that connection is a bad connection. It's not going to be helpful. Anger is not bad. The behavior that you've linked with it, that's bad. That's not helpful. So you're again going back and you're linking that feeling with a maladaptive behavior. Then you offer a substitute and you say, hey, listen, man, it's okay to be angry, but it's not cool to hit. It's not cool to kick. It's not cool to call people an idiot. Hey, next time you feel angry, just take 5 deep breaths, just like we do when we find our learning place. Okay, so I'm going to talk about that. What is learning place? So you're saying pull that connection, pull that emotion that it's connected to that behavior, pull it out of that behavior, and link it with this other behavior over here. Because if you take 5 deep breaths and you start practicing that now, you're going to get really, really good at managing anger, and it's going to serve you well. And you're going to do better than a lot of people. You're going to find a better performance because you can do that. So that's where you link it with the proper behavior. So again, instead of getting angry, we're going to practice deep breaths. And so again, you'll see on this slide here, it says, when we find our learning place. Well, what is our learning place? Our learning place is the front part of our brain. It's called our frontal lobe is the technical name for it. So our brain develops really from back here. The brain's like a lot of our emotion, our fight or flight is back here in our brain stem. This is our animal or reptile brain, the lizard brain. And then this up here behind our forehead is called our frontal lobe. And this is not fully developed in adult males until you're in your mid-20s, right? So this takes a while to get there, but this part of our brain, this frontal lobe, is where it's called executive functioning. It's where higher order thinking happens. It's where problem solving happens. This is rational thought. This is emotion right here. So the goal, when I say get to the learning place, what I mean is get from back here to up here. And breathing is an excellent way to do that. Breathing relaxes me and gets me into my frontal lobe. So here's the language I use when I work with kids, and they get it real quick. I say, think of a mullet. So back in my day, back in the 80s, the hairstyle called the mullet, business in front, party in the back, right? And by the way, I'm happy to see that some of the young kids are starting to rock the mullet again. I may pull out a mullet. Anyway, that's what I tell kids. Think about your mullet. Business in front, party in the back. That's the brain. Like this is your learning place. It's the business in front. If you're in your emotion, it's party in the back. And as long as you're emotional, you can't learn. You can't make good decisions. So that's what I'm getting at here. Breathing is a great way to pull myself out of my animal brain, out of my sympathetic nervous system, out of fight or flight, into my higher order frontal lobe, into rest and digest, into executive functioning and thinking clearly. So that's what I mean by all of that. So let's go back to the slide there, and you'll see that's step 4. Link it with an adaptive behavior. And then step 5 is reinforce it. Reward any approximation of the replacement behavior. So say, thank you for taking one deep breath, keep going. Here's what I mean by that. So let's say you're working with a student, or anybody for that matter, and it's like, hey man, here's the deal. You get angry a lot. It's cool to, you have permission to be angry. It's not my job to tell you what you need to feel. It's not my job to tell you can't be angry. You can be angry, absolutely. But you can't act a fool. You can't go around talking smack about people because, well, they made me angry. So no, you can't do that. Do this other thing instead. Practice your breathing instead. That's good. And here's the deal. So if you're working with a student, if you can practice your breathing, I'm gonna reinforce that, man. I'm just gonna let you know I see you doing the different thing. I see you disconnecting from that behavior and connecting to this behavior. Good job. And I'm gonna reinforce that. So let's say that a student gets angry and you say, hey, you can be angry, but you can't tear things up. Remember, learning space, mullet, business in front, party in the back. Let's get to business in front. Let's take some deep breaths. And so let's say they go, all right, whatever, this is stupid. 1, 2, this is stupid. And they go off to the races and they just start cussing you out or whatever. So you're thinking like, oh man, we've been working so hard, and they couldn't even take 5 deep breaths. It's tempting as the leader to get to be just, and understandable that you're discouraged, you're frustrated as a leader because you're trying hard to help them. But we don't want to lose sight of the fact that at least they took 2 breaths, and that's a step in the right direction. So part of my role as a leader is to regulate my own sense of frustration and my own anger. And in those moments, it's tempting for me to connect that emotion to behavior or language like, when are you going to learn, man? God, this isn't that hard. Come on, just do it. Everybody else can do it. Why can't you do it? Golly, it's hard for me, or it's tempting for me to want to go there with my own emotion. But that's where I practice adult SEL, where I practice adult emotional intelligence, leadership emotional intelligence, to say, oh, I'm frustrated, but let me take a deep breath and say, okay, you didn't take 5 breaths, but you took 2. Thank you. You're moving in the right direction. I really, really appreciate that. Do you see how different that is from a leadership perspective, versus getting frustrated and talking down to a student or somebody that you're leading, and versus just supporting them and reinforcing. You gave me 1 deep breath, man. Thank you. So that's the roadmap. Again, number 1, I want to identify the feeling. Number 2, validate it. Number 3, link it with a problematic behavior. Number 4, offer a substitute. And number 5, reinforce the new one. In a nutshell, that's it. So we're thinking emotional engineering. How do I take a fuel, disconnect it from an unhelpful behavior, and connect it with a helpful behavior? Emotion is not bad any more than gasoline is bad, or propane is bad, or electricity. There's no such thing as bad fuel. Sometimes those fuels get out of hand and do hurtful things to the environment. Yes. Same thing with emotion. It's not good or bad. Sometimes those emotions get connected to the wrong behavior and do hurtful things to the environment, or psychological things. Yes, hurtful, but the emotion's not bad. So I love this quote here. This is a paraphrase of the great Fred Rogers. Man, I love that guy. He said, all emotions are mentionable and all emotions are manageable. And that's it. All emotions are okay. None are bad. And there are helpful and hurtful ways to manage our emotions. Again, that's emotional intelligence 101, basic. At its core level, what does it mean to manage emotion? Well, we talked about it. Okay, so let me go back to the overview slide. Warm-up exercise, we did that. You reflected on your family of origin, what emotions you're comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with. A lot of that plays into how we as adults practice emotional intelligence. Then we talked about emotional literacy, why we need it. We need it because our adolescents and our young people, they're going to grow up to be a certain kind of adult. And if we can impart those skills at a young age, as they get older, they're going to get better and better and better, and they're going to be more functional and more adaptive as parents, as employees, as employers, in every capacity in their adult life. We talked about the 5 ways to respond to emotion. I can ignore it. I can inhibit it. I can invalidate it, or I can invite it so that I can finally instruct it. And then how do I instruct it? We talked about the 5-step process. It's just about taking that emotion, unlinking it from an unhelpful behavior and linking it to a helpful behavior. All right. So I said before I was feeling hopeful, I think I said, because I'm hoping that you got some information that will help you in your personal life and help you in your capacity as a leader. So I still feel hopeful. And again, this is just practical stuff that can make our life better. Okay. Thanks so much for being with me. And I appreciate all that you do.